This summer, try the new Strato Frappuccino blended beverage at Starbucks. It's the classic blended iced coffee you know and love, now topped with a creamy layer of handcrafted brown sugar cold foam. Available for a limited time. Your Strato Frappuccino is ready at Starbucks.
The Abercrombie Kids Summer Sale is in full swing, with up to 50% off select styles for the season. Summer plans, vacation, and camp days are all covered, with new dresses, shorts, tees, and swim. Abercrombie Kids has the summer staples they need and the looks that they want to wear. Shop in-store, online, or in the app. Offer applies to select styles as indicated. Discount applied at checkout online.
You are listening to Women's Running Stories, where exceptional women runners share inspirational stories about their running experiences. Hello and welcome. I am Cherie Louise Turner, and I am the host and producer of Women's Running Stories. Thank you so much for being here. You are about to hear a great running story. I have Lisa Levin on the podcast, telling her running story all the way through to today, where at 51, she is more excited than ever to challenge herself and set motivating goals. But before moving into Lisa's story, I want to tell you about another podcast that I am really excited to be producing. It is coming soon, and it is called Earth Movers with Allison Mariella Desir, Stephanie Flippen, and Verna Nesbigay Volker. And it is a trail podcast reclaiming the narrative. It is the first trail podcast to feature 3 women of color hosting, and it's the first trail podcast centering people of color with stories, experiences, insights, and wisdom for everybody. Yeah, I am super thrilled. Our first episode will be dropping on August 14th. Right now, we do have a Kickstarter campaign going, and there you can pledge your support. You can learn more about the show. I would also love it if you shared this Kickstarter with others. And in the Kickstarter, we have great rewards depending on how much you pledge. There are shout-outs on the show, t-shirts, hoodies, a signed copy of Allison Mariella Desir's groundbreaking book, Running While Black, and, of course, my deep gratitude for your support. Yeah, you can help bring this groundbreaking podcast to life. I'm just over the moon to be behind the scenes producing this new show. You can also learn more and keep up with the podcast on Instagram. We are at Earth Movers Podcast. I will, of course, provide links to the Kickstarter and to the Instagram account in the show notes. So thank you. Now, returning to Lisa, in addition to being a longtime runner with a particular interest in running marathons, especially Boston, which she has run an astonishing 22 times, she is also a coach and a podcaster with Julie Sapper, who was featured on Women's Running Stories last week. Lisa and Julie co-host the terrific podcast Run Farther and Faster, and they also coach together through their coaching business under the same name. And over the last 4 years, I have gotten to team up with Julie and Lisa to co-host panels over Boston Marathon weekend, which we have recorded, and those are episodes on the podcast. So you have heard Lisa and Julie on Women's Running Stories in that capacity. But now I get to have them both on the podcast sharing their own running journeys. Last week with Julie and this week with Lisa. And yeah, here Lisa tells her whole running journey from how she got started through IVF treatments and to pregnancies up until right now, with a look forward to her next goal. For Lisa, aging is a time of new and exciting possibilities, so get ready to be inspired. One thing I wanted to clarify before we get started here is that Lisa mentions having Raynaud's, and if you aren't familiar with it, this is a condition that causes some areas of the body, typically the hands and feet, fingers and toes, to feel numb and painfully cold in response to cold temperatures and stress. All right, let's get into it. Let's hear Lisa Levin's running story, starting with her first experiences in the sport back in middle school. Now, here to tell her story is Lisa Levin.
When I was in middle school, there was a middle school track team that only met in the spring, I believe. And I tried it out spring of my 8th grade year, which would have been right before I went to high school. And I realized that I really liked it and it was something that I was good at. And that was unique for me because I was never good at sports. I was always the last pick for any ball sport team. I had very poor hand-eye coordination. That was just not my thing. And I always sort of felt a little bit left out of, of sports. And my friends were on soccer teams and on basketball teams. And I just was not, that was not my thing. So when I did track in 8th grade, I realized it was something that I felt fit me and I was good at. So I enjoyed it and then went on to high school and I learned that to be on the high school cross country team, you needed to stay every day after school for 2 hours to run with the group, to workouts with the group. And I thought, heck no, I'm going home after school. I am not staying 2 hours after school. So I always say my laziness delayed my entry into running. So I did not run. I did not do anything athletic. I was on the flag squad, which is the drill team for the marching band, twirls the flag. So I was on the flag squad. That was what I did. I did a little bit of cheerleading in high school through the Jewish Community Center, which needless to say is not like the pinnacle of competitive cheerleading squads. It was great, wonderful women on the team with me, and it was a lot of fun. But that was the extent of my athletic abilities. Fast forward, when I was in law school, I was really just looking for some sort of exercise for stress relief. So that was my original motivation, was just something I could do to kind of get away from the books, get away from the stress of law school. And I remember I started the summer before I went to law school, I started in my parents' neighborhood, just going down and back their street, which was maybe about a mile. And just loving the feel of being by myself. I've never to this day listened to music or used headphones or anything like that on my runs. And I like just having that time to myself a lot of times early in the morning, just to think through my day, think through what was coming up, think through this transition to law school. And then once I got to law school, it was a chance to, again, get away from the stress of studying, to take a break from the books, to just get out and run. And actually I did a lot of running. Then from what I remember on a treadmill in the gym, I would just say, I'm going to go to the gym and get in a treadmill run. So it was stress relief. And I have a younger sister who at the time was a student teacher in an elementary school in our hometown. And when I came home for the summer, she said, I guess it was the end of the school year for her. She said, we have this little 5K that the elementary school is doing. We're trying to raise money for the library. Would you come do it? You've been doing some running. Would you come participate? And I said, of course, I'll come support the school. And it was a pretty small 5K. And most of the participants were parents and their kids that came to run for fun. And I took second place woman. And I got a gift card and I thought, oh my gosh, I won something in something athletic. Like this has never happened in my life. And I was hooked. I love that feeling of accomplishment. I love the feeling of being good at something, finally athletic in my life. And just started gradually there with doing some 5Ks. Eventually, I remember, I think about a year in, I decided to train for a 10K. I swore I would never do a marathon. I remember we live in the DC area. And I remember driving by Arlington where the Marine Corps Marathon finishes one year. And it was a year that it was a rainy year. And all the marathoners had finished. They had their silver space blankets around them. They were shivering. They looked miserable in the cold rain. And I looked at them and I said, I will never do a marathon. So famous last words. Eventually I trained for a 10-miler race. I did the Army 10-miler one year and it was in similarly cold, rainy conditions. And I finished it. And I said, if I could finish that in cold, rainy conditions, maybe I could do a marathon. Like I said, I ran that Army 10 miler, and it's that, gradual progression I think we all go through. And we've seen runners that we coach go through is if I can do a 5K, well, maybe I can do a 10K. If I can do a 10K, maybe I can do a 10 miler. If I can do a 10 miler, maybe I can do a half marathon, right? So I did the 10 miler in these terrible conditions. And I just thought, I think I can probably do a marathon, but I had no idea. I didn't know anything about the marathon. I didn't know about training for a marathon. I didn't, and this is the interesting reflection to me now, being where I am now, is I didn't know what the Boston Marathon was. So I signed up to train with a local training group. It was actually a chiropractic practice that had a training group. So it was two chiropractors that oversaw this training group. And I signed up, they were in Northern Virginia, and I signed up to train with them in, I guess it would have been the summer of 2000. And right about that time, we moved from Arlington to Maryland. So I was now on the other side of DC, which is not a super long drive, but it wasn't as convenient to train with them. So I decided I would just do the long runs with them on weekends. I would take the drive over to Virginia and meet them to do the long runs. And I remember looking at the training calendar and being like, this is ridiculous. This is way too intense for me. And I don't want this like structure. I don't want this pressure of training. I said to myself, I will do my thing during the week and I will go train with them on the weekends. And I kept up consistency during the week. I think I substituted some running workouts for the elliptical. I did not do any of their speed workouts. They did a track workout together during the weekdays, which I obviously didn't have time to go to Virginia to do. So I did not do any of that. Intimidated me. I thought, I don't want this pressure of like paces and whatever. So I just met with them on the weekends to do the long runs. And I remember the two coaches asking me at some point, what is your expected finish time for the marathon? And I said, yeah, I think 5 hours would be a good target. Like that seems like a reasonable expectation. Again, having no idea. I didn't know anything about marathons. I didn't know anything about extrapolating times from my previous races. And they looked at my 10 miler race time and some of my other race times. And they said, we think you're going to do faster than 5 hours, but okay. So trained with them through the whole season for Marine Corps Marathon in 2000. And lo and behold, I crossed the finish line at Marine Corps. I think it was 3 hours and 22 minutes was my finish time. And they came up to me and they said, you qualified for Boston. And I said, what is Boston? I didn't even know what that meant. I had no idea what they meant when they said you qualified for Boston. I said, what do you mean? And they said, the Boston Marathon, you need a qualifying time. You got the qualifying time. I thought, well, that's kind of cool. That's pretty neat. Maybe I'll do that in the spring. Because I was hooked. I do remember finishing. My parents who are local came to watch me on the course and they met me at the finish line. They said, how do you feel? And I said, I could do it again. Like, I want to go back and I want to go run it again. Like they were like, how do you have energy to go run it again? But I felt so good at the finish that I was definitely hooked. I thought this is something I want to do again. So I thought, well, I qualified for this Boston Marathon in April. Let me sign up for that. And again, just ironic to think back that this was in 2000. So it had been for the 2001 Boston Marathon. And at that time, you did not have to register in advance. You didn't have to book hotel rooms far in advance. They were, very inexpensive hotel rooms. So I think I ended up registering for Boston. I don't know, maybe in January or February, I decided I would run the Boston Marathon. And that training story is actually interesting too. I had trained for Marine Corps through the summer and I love running in warm weather. I have Raynaud's. So when I run in the cold, either both my fingers and toes usually feel like they're frostbitten and are very painful. So I had not trained for a marathon through a winter training cycle. And I remember deciding to train for Boston probably in January or February. And I went out for the first training run, which was really cold. And my feet were in so much pain that I said, I can't run outside in the winter. Like, this is impossible. I'm going to have to train on a treadmill. So I remember going to the gym and trying to do like a 14 or 15 mile long run on the treadmill. And it was so boring and so painful that I thought, I can't do this. What am I going to do for training? So I realized from prior cross-training experience that I could read on an elliptical. So I said, I'm going to just do all of my training on an elliptical. And I still remember my gym, they would joke, they would say like, oh, here she comes, the woman, this is her elliptical. And I would bring a stack of magazines. I had a magazine subscriptions to about 10 magazines, and I would bring a stack of magazines. And I would literally, for my long runs, I would go on the elliptical for maybe, I don't know, 2 hours. I don't think it was longer than 2 hours, but I would go on the elliptical for like 2 hours. And then the rest of the week, I would also do elliptical workouts. I would just go on the elliptical. I'd bring my magazines and I would read on the elliptical. And everyone in the gym was like, there she is again, the elliptical woman. She's just on the elliptical. And I thought, all I want to do is just get to this marathon. Like everyone's talking about the Boston Marathon. I just want to go experience it. I want to have enough fitness to just finish the race. Like, I don't care what my finish time is. I just want to have enough fitness, and I can't train outside in the winter. So I did all of my training on the elliptical, and I went to Boston, and my finish time was 3:27. So it was 5 minutes slower than when I had trained with this training group outside. I would never do that again, but that's my like fun training story for Boston. And so really after that, when I did Boston that year, I swore to myself I would come back to Boston every time that I could qualify and come back to Boston. That experience was like, that was such an experience that I vowed to myself I would be back to Boston every year I could. So my running has always been for me, and I've been more competitive with myself than anything else. But it's also, like I said before, I came to running as pretty much a form of stress relief, more time for myself. And it was I never went into it, and I never really developed this a focus on my finish times. It turned into that eventually, you know, once you get into it and you see where you finish, and then you want to do better the next time. But where I started with running was something for me, and something that brought me a lot of peace and a lot of a chance to think through the day. And so I remember those coaches that I had for the first marathon training cycle. After I finished that first marathon, they said, wow, they said, you know, if you really like buckled down, you didn't do any of the speed workouts, you just kind of did your own thing during the week. If you really buckled down and focused on speed work, you could qualify for the Olympic trials, which at that time in 2000, I think the qualifying time was probably 250 something. And they said, you could, you know, let us work with you and let us put together a plan, and let's get like hardcore and go for it. And I looked at them, I said, no way. That is not, like, if there is pressure and there is this expectation of hitting certain paces, like, I don't want that. That's not what it is about for me. And to this day, it is not about that. I do not do, now I'm a coach, and I assign track workouts, and I try to assign tempo workouts, and I think they are important. I don't do them. I don't go out to a track and give myself a workout that I have to hit certain paces. I race. So I will go out and I will do races where I feel like I can go out and run a race, and that's my speed work. But I don't give myself pace expectations in any of my runs. And that comes through, especially in my easy runs. I race a marathon still at about 7:20 pace is probably a good marathon for me. And I run my easy runs. I don't care. I don't look, but my easy runs are generally 9:20 to 9:30. And on a good day, on a hot day like today, it might be 9:45s. So I've never wanted to go out and say like, oh, if I don't hit, 8:30s on my easy runs, like my performance is going to decline. I don't like that focus on numbers and on hitting certain paces, and I never have. So to me, while I would consider myself competitive with myself, I want to keep hitting good times. I don't put myself under the pressure of hitting certain workouts, or even making sure that I do certain workouts. Definitely mileage. Like I'm big on getting consistency. That's really the bottom line for me, is being consistent. I think that is what has helped me progress through my entire running career, is just, knock on wood, consistency. Not having big breaks from injuries or for whatever reason, is just being consistent. So that's where I fall in terms of my competitiveness. Is absolutely, I want to hit my potential, and I want to stay healthy most of all, and get to the start line healthy. But I've never been comfortable with having big expectations put on me by somebody else, or having to hit certain paces or do certain workouts. Yeah, and I'll also add that also I've really developed an appreciation for, particularly with races, like some days are good and some days it doesn't come together. It does not mean that I don't have the fitness, right? So a good example, I did a 10-miler race just last month in June, and was not great. Like I had done the same 10-miler race the year before. It's a hard race. It's hot usually. This year was hotter than last year, but I was over 2 minutes slower, which is a lot on a 10-miler, right? And I could have felt like, wow, what is wrong with me? Like, okay, finally I'm hitting 51. Or is this where like I start to go decline? Like, and I just shook it off. I said, you know what? I've been consistent. I know I've been getting in the mileage. It probably was just the day. It could have just been the day. And I went on to do a race a week or two later where I was hit the exact same time I did last year and came in, fourth woman or third woman, first masters. I felt great out on the course, hitting paces that I've hit. I look back and my times are, when I ran Chicago in 2024. So last year when I ran, was it 2023? Maybe it's 2023. Anyway, when I ran Chicago, I finished in exactly the same finish time that I had run Chicago 20 years prior. So I look kind of back at like where, I look at the whole trajectory and I'm still hitting similar paces. Like that to me feels good. It doesn't matter that in that race, it was slower than, 2 minutes slower than the prior year. Like I try not to let that bring me down. I try to look kind of at the bigger picture. And if I've been able to maintain, I was looking at my 5K times the other day, just out of curiosity. I'm like, what did I used to run 5Ks in? And I'm not that far off anymore. I mean, there was a period of time that I was able to get sub 20 pretty regularly, but most of the time I was in the 20s, and that's where I still finish, is in the 20s. So that consistency to me is more important, than some other external expectations or motivations. So I went through 5 rounds of IVF after other rounds of other fertility treatments. Like it was over 2 years, which is not a very long period of time. So it's very compressed. And actually that is one of the years I have now, jumping ahead, I have finished 22 Boston marathons, but they are not consecutive. And everyone always thinks, well, of course, when you had your kids, you probably took off those years. And that's true. But the only other year that I missed was a year I was going through an IVF cycle. And I couldn't go to Boston. And so that is another year that before I had my kids, a year that I missed. And then there's another year, I think it must have been the next year, where I was pissed that I had missed it the year before. And I timed it so I was in the middle of IVF cycles. I was between IVF cycles for Boston that following year. And that to this day is still, I believe, other than maybe 2018, which was the horrible weather year, my slowest finish time. So I went there and I said, I know I'm going through IVF. I know I've got all these hormones in my body. My body is not my body at this point. Like it was really, a difficult time, but I said, I'm going to Boston because I want to feel like I have some control in this process and I want to feel some normalcy. So I am going. I don't care that my training wasn't perfect. I don't care that I'm sure I gained weight at the time. I had been on hormones for so many cycles. And I went and I was just, I'm going to enjoy Boston. And I did. And it was one of my, I still, when I look back and I'm always like, what was 2005? Oh, right. That was the year I went in the middle of IVF cycles, right? So I think that to me, running during that period of time was such an important part of my life. And I actually wrote an article. It's in the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. It's Chicken Soup for the Runner's Soul. There is an article still in there, or a piece that I wrote that was accepted for that book. And it talks about how running was such an important part of me feeling some sort of normalcy, but also struggling with, should I be running, right? Should I be running? Am I hurting my chances of having a successful IVF cycle if I'm running? So I took a lot of time off thinking like, well, I shouldn't run during the cycle because what if running is making it so I can't get pregnant? So that was definitely, but running is what kept me sane through all of that. And really at that point in 2004, 2005, there weren't online support groups. Well, there were, but they were like online discussion groups, but there weren't that many resources for people going. I felt very alone. So the running for me was so important. And in between IVF cycles, if I'd have a failed cycle, I would then go back out and run and get in running. And then when I'd go through another cycle, I'd pull back, and it was back and forth. When I got pregnant, finally, after 5 IVF cycles, I got pregnant with my twins. And the doctor assured me, said, it is fine to run. You will be fine to run. You can go out, you can run. Easy, easy runs, short runs, you should be fine to run. But I didn't. At the very beginning of the pregnancy, I said, I'm not going to do anything. And I got a little more comfortable as the pregnancy went on. It wasn't very far into the pregnancy, but maybe 8 weeks into the pregnancy, I said, okay, I feel a little bit better. I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to go back to my old buddy, the elliptical. I'm just going to do that. I'm not going to run and have impact of running, but I'm going to do the elliptical. So I went to the gym, I did the elliptical. And later that day, I had a bleeding episode. And it turns out it had nothing to do, the doctors assured me, had nothing to do with the fact that I had done the elliptical. It was a subchorionic hematoma that was there, that had been there, and it just happened to bleed out later that day. But it scared me so much that I said, I am not doing any exercise for this entire pregnancy. They kept saying, no, you're okay. This was a subchorionic hematoma. The exercise did not form it. It did not cause it to bleed. You're okay to exercise. I said, no, I'm not. I did nothing. So I literally did no physical activity for 9 months. I sort of put myself on modified bed rest because I had worked so hard for this pregnancy. And so I did no running. And I really, frankly, didn't worry about, what it meant for my long-term running. My priority was having a healthy pregnancy. So I did no running. I had my twins in March of 2006 and had a C-section. So I had to take the requisite time to recover from that. And very easily and very gradually started getting back into running that summer. And my now ex-husband, but husband at the time, was training for a Marine Corps marathon in October of that same year of 2006. And I said to him, how about if I train with you and I run the race with you as my sort of comeback, because that'll be an easier pace for me and lower expectations. And he said, that's great. He's like, why don't we do that? So I did very modified training, did not do a full marathon training cycle, but trained just enough so that I could run with him and pace him in October. So I was back at a marathon. My twins were born March 29th and end of October, I was back at that marathon and felt good and felt like I had my running legs back, and actually then decided after I did that with him that I would sign up for Richmond, which was I forget, maybe 4 weeks later, and do my own marathon. And I will say it was a hot Richmond that year. I remember it was like 80 degrees, but I was back to pretty close to my marathon times from before I had kids. So I was back to running. And I think the motivation driving me back was definitely time for myself, especially after I had my twins, right? That was like the time for myself and a chance to go get out and have a little bit of, quiet time. It was really the only time during the day that I had to myself. So that was the motivation. Getting back to I really at that point, so I started running in 1997. I did my first marathon in 2000, and this was 2006. So this was about almost 10 years into running, where it had become part of my, I wouldn't say identity, but it was what I knew what I loved. It was something that I loved to do, and it was something that was important to me. So I knew I wanted to get back to it. And the timing of my next child was also a very interesting part of the story and related to running. After I had my twins, I remember the doctor who delivered them said, okay, what kind of birth control are you going to go on now? And I laughed at him. I said, are you kidding me? I said, I took just like 5 rounds of IVF. Part of my theory was that having been on birth control pills before I tried to get pregnant, that had affected me in some way. I thought that it might have been the birth control pills, because I did find out during IVF that I shouldn't have been taking birth controls anyway, because I have a protein S deficiency, and that I should not have been on the estrogen, I believe it was. So in my head, I thought it might have been the birth control pills that caused this whole problem in the first place. So I laughed at him. I said, I'm not going on birth control. I'm just probably not going to get pregnant again, because look how much it took us to get here. And he said, be very careful. I just delivered a single baby to a woman who had triplets like 10 months ago. And I said, that's not going to be me. So I didn't go back on birth control. I got back to running, and actually I had signed up for Boston to go back to Boston that next year. So that would have been 2007. And I had decided I was going to start doing triathlons. I took my bike out, and I was back to training. I'm like, all right, I'm getting back to Boston. I'm going to do triathlons. And my training volume went way up after I had my twins. So I would say I was definitely training more than I ever had. I was cycling, I was swimming, I was doing longer runs and more volume. And that February I got pregnant. So there goes the theory that running was preventing me from getting pregnant the first time, because I was doing more running, and found out in February of 2007. So keep in mind, this is 2 months before Boston, right? I find out that I am pregnant again, and spontaneously. And I really struggled with what do I do? And I can actually picture where I was when I went through this thought process of, I realized I hadn't, because I was still kind of coming off my previous pregnancy, and I can't remember what else. I think my training volume was high, but I'd focused so much. I was focusing more on cycling and swimming that I hadn't done as much running. And then I just was a little bit afraid. I thought, do I want to run Boston when I think at the time would have been like 4 months pregnant with my daughter? I said, do I want to run Boston 4 months pregnant? And I still had a little bit of that fear of like, what if I run it and something happens? And also just, again, thought like my running volume hasn't been as much because I've been focusing on the bike and on swimming. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to skip Boston this year. And I can still remember where I was sitting at my computer where I decided to, at that point you could defer. So I decided to defer. And that was the year, that was 2007. So anyone who's familiar with Boston will know that was the year of the nor'easter. So I also can still remember I was still getting the race emails because I was still technically, I guess, on the registration list, even though I deferred. And I can still remember getting the email that said, weather warning, it's going to be these horrible conditions. And I thought, wow, this is good. This worked out well for me that I'm not going to be there this year. So I did not go to Boston in 2007. I kept I did run, and I am known in my neighborhood now as the crazy woman that ran pregnant with a double jogging stroller. So I would run around my neighborhood with my twins in a double jogging stroller and my big pregnant belly with my third. And I ran through that entire pregnancy until, again, at that point I was like, okay, if I got pregnant on all that running and volume, like I don't think it's gonna, I listened to my body, I slowed down my running, obviously, but I kept running, and I said, I'm gonna run as long as I can through this pregnancy. So I ran until probably maybe 4 weeks before my daughter was born, when it just got too uncomfortable to run. But again, running behind the big double jogging stroller, and my neighbors still make fun of me. They're like, oh yeah, we thought, who is that crazy lady with the double jogging stroller pregnant? And so that was, kind of continuing that phase of my running was realizing that I could run through my pregnancy, and I could keep doing something that made me feel like I still had a piece of my, and that's what I think eventually it became, especially after I had my third, was it was mine. The running was my thing. It was my, my part of my identity. Everything else was given to my kids, everything, like every minute of my day, and everything I did was all about them. But running was something that I had, and going to do a race was something that I had, and an accomplishment for me. So that was a sort of an important transition into kind of the next phase after I had my daughter. That's where I think I became much more focused on training and on goals. And it wasn't just like, oh, let me go, oh, that looks like a fun marathon, let me go do that. That's where I started. And at that point I had already done several Boston marathons. My goal was still to always make it back to Boston. So then it was, what am I going to do to qualify? Do I need to qualify? What am I going to do? And frankly, I always tell people, once I had kids and my time was a lot tighter, I had to make the most of the time that I had. So I think my focus on my training and focus on getting in mileage and being consistent was much better, because I had to. It was by necessity. So that's probably where I think my running transitioned into more competitive and also more community based. That's where I got more involved with the Montgomery County Roadrunners Club. That's when I met Julie in 2009. That's when we started coaching runners, and that's when my life started to become more focused around running.
No way.
After my daughter was born, I started doing some triathlon and duathlon as well. And having had the experience and the talent in running and also in cycling, which I found I was good at cycling, which doesn't surprise me. My dad is a big cyclist, gave me a big advantage. And I eventually qualified for Team USA for USA Triathlon's World Duathlon Championships. And I went and I competed there and did really well there. And every time I did well and kind of had this opportunity to be on a team or be part of be kind of part of this I wouldn't say elite group, but an accomplished group of athletes, it kept motivating me to look for more to do like that. What else can I do? What else can I strive for? What else is out there? And so that's, I think, where the competitive side started to come in, is what else can I be good at? And where can I go with that? And I think part of it was natural, just being able, when I did well at a race, like that motivates you to want to do well at the next race, or place well at the next race. And again, kind of looking for what's that next thing that I can do. And that in that triathlon era or phase, that was, after I'd done these world duathlon competitions, and I did one, the long course world duathlon competition, which is a very long course. It was about an 8-hour race. After I did that, I thought, okay, what again, I'm looking for these, like, what else can I challenge myself to do and set the next goal? I said, I'm going to do a full Ironman. I'd done some half Ironman, but I decided I'm going to do a full Ironman. And part of the appeal to me is not the event itself, but the training, right? What do I have to put into it to get there, and setting those goals for myself. So for me, it's the process too. It's that process of, okay, for Ironman, really, that's like a part-time job, 20 hours a week. I'm either out running on the roads, I'm in the pool, I'm doing long bike rides, right? So that appealed to me, like what next? So again, every time I would do something and achieve something that maybe surprised me, that I didn't think I could achieve, it gave me a little confidence to, like, okay, what else can I do? And what's the next challenge? So it was, again, always internal of what can I challenge myself to do? What's going to get a little bit out of my comfort zone that maybe I didn't think before I could do. And now that I've accomplished this, hey, maybe that just like that original marathon where I thought I will never do a marathon. I could never do that. And then I ran that 10-miler in those horrible conditions and thought, okay, if I can do that, like, what else can I do? Can I step a little bit outside of my comfort zone and see what's next? I am really excited, as opposed to some other people that I know or that I've heard, or maybe the traditional sentiment towards aging. I am excited to see how sharp I can stay and how consistent I can stay into the next couple of decades, as I'm going into grandmaster's status. And I am heading to the senior games, the national senior games this summer. And I have been looking forward to this for like probably the last 5 to 10 years. When I found out there was a senior games that you could qualify for when you were 50, I thought, that's it. That is what I want. I want to be with these people who at 50 to 100 plus years old are still like wanting to compete and wanting to get out there. And that I truly look for, there's a qualifying race that's right here in nearby, this 5K, the Lakelands Kentlands 5K. And it's always been the qualifier for the Senior Olympics. And every year I've done it, I'm like, how many more years until I can qualify for the Senior Games? And I coach a woman who qualified a few years ago. And when she finished, I said, oh, you qualified for the Senior Games. And she said, I want nothing to do with anything that has the word senior in it. She was offended that I would even suggest to her that she should go to the Senior Games. She's like, no, I don't want anything to do with that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't wait. And so sure enough, last year was my first chance and I qualified, and I am going to the Senior Games. So I am actually really, I almost have a new sense of excitement about this aging process and seeing, and again, it goes back to that internal motivation and that internal competition of like, how fast and how much can I maintain of my speed over the last 20 years? How much of that can I maintain moving forward into this grandmasters and senior category? And really, we have so many amazing, accomplished, inspiring runners around here in my area that I did a race on Juneteenth and saw some of these runners, that women who have been, since I started 20 years ago, they were always the top finishers in races, in local races. I still have old results where, they're the top women finishers. And these women at, 60 plus years old are still out there racing. And I love talking to them. I love seeing them still out there. And that's what I'm excited about, is I want to be that. I want to be that one that's still out there. Now, they're certainly not running their same times. They're not winning the races anymore, but they're winning their age groups and they're out there. And that, I love that. That to me is like inspiring. I just even love watching, when they announce at races, the 70 to 74 age group, the 75 to 79, the 80 plus age group. I stick around for that because I want to see those people up there getting their awards and, that they're still out there doing this and finding joy in it. So that I'm really excited about that.
I love it. I feel this excitement too. There's so much fun opportunity out there to keep getting after it in our running journeys as we age. And I'm really looking forward to what comes next for Lisa, including the senior games. Thank you so much, Lisa, for coming on the podcast and sharing your running story. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. And that does bring us to the end of Lisa Levin's running story on the podcast. But, of course, you can keep up with her online and on the Run Farther and Faster podcast. Go give it a listen. I really like Lisa and Julie's podcast. They have great guests. They share lots of really helpful information. They talk about their own running, and they're just wonderful on the mic together. So yeah, go give them a listen. I will provide all of the pertinent links in the show notes. And that does bring me to the end of this episode. Thank you once again so much for being here. I always appreciate you coming and listening to these stories. I am Cherie Louise Turner. I am the host and producer of Women's Running Stories. And until next Tuesday, I do wish you joyful, healthy, consistent strides forward. Women's Running. Women's running stories.